Latia and then Tyr. And their warning is that all residents need to flee. We've already seen over 1,200,000 people on the move already. Now 25% or so of Lebanon is under these mass evacuation orders. It is feeling increasingly difficult to find a safe place to go, and in the meantime, the human toll and the toll on this country and on its infrastructure just continues to increase at a terrifying level.
We are indeed witnessing Syrian refugees who sought refuge in Lebanon. Talk to us about the impact, more of the impact on civilians and especially children. How are they coping with this crisis?
So children have been living with the uncertainty of the war, of course, since last October, and since the September of this year, with a massive increase in displacement, and really so many of these families fled their homes without anything. Really put the kids in the car and moved to
Firecracker!
Their toys and their sense of their community and their friends, and they've ended up in collective shelters or with host families. Quite a number, as you have indicated, have also crossed the border into Syria, both Syrian refugees and Lebanese. And these children are experiencing recurrent traumas as their families are unable or having difficulty in providing a sense of protection and normalcy for them. And importantly, also now, as the school year should be starting, school year had just begun when this last escalation began, and children are again in their sixth year of extremely disrupted education, and schooling and going to school is one of the most important stabilizing
them for no say dollars I grade straight like a arrow around here. What do them, man? If now a bag of chatting in a wizard, what do them, man? Let me tell them that's a grade straight like a arrow. Got today, got tomorrow, got forever and ever. And that we say dollars are great. Oh, even now. Oh, even now. Die great now go where them boy go. We not do where them boy do. I great no sleep where them boy sleep, and we no eat where them boy eat. We say not go where them boy go. We not do where them boy do. We not sleep where them boy sleep, and we no eat where them boy eat. Say man straight, man no colonel lean. Live at 60 princess in a with. We no care who here. Say no man do it, no man do it. Nah go eat too much rich in a the thing. Nah go prefer the same damn thing. Exercise but we not got no gym. Rather serve up party your team. I make them touch me, make them muscle get up. And after that I be a push up. After that I be a sweat up. Rest them and shut up. I grade no go where them boy go, and we no know where them boy do. We not sleep where them boy sleep, and we no eat where them boy eat. I no go where them boy go. We not do where them boy do. We not sleep where them boy sleep, and we no eat where them boy eat. Them fi know this a rasta no free. I know anything you give me, I go get. No chicken, no mutton, no beef. Rasta for right straight completely. I know when you want to sleep or party.
Authorities in some of the worst areas are advising people to avoid non-essential travel. In the Gaza Strip, at least 19 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli bombing near Lahia Square in the north. Rescue teams are trying to find survivors, with at least 30 people believed to be trapped beneath collapsed buildings. And officials in Lebanon say an Israeli strike on the southern town of Sarafat has killed at least 10 people. 9 others were killed in an attack on the suburb of Harit Saida on the outskirts of Sidon. Well, let's discuss these latest developments in Lebanon and Gaza with Ibrahim Freyhat, who's an associate professor of conflict resolution at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Good to have you with us, Ibrahim, on the NewsHour. So, as we heard from our correspondent earlier, Zaina, and from our previous guests in Israel, Gideon Levy, Israel has signaled that it's interested in reaching some kind of ceasefire in Lebanon today. What are your thoughts about the prospects of a ceasefire? Are the conditions on the ground right for one to be achieved?
Yeah, I think there are good prospects about reaching a ceasefire in Lebanon, especially when we compare it to Gaza. But probably not for the reasons that Gideon Levy mentioned in his previous interview, because of a pressure inside the Israeli camp. Netanyahu never listens to pressure from inside, because we had in the previous seen 500,000 people protesting for a prisoners exchange, and he never did. He never accepted. Now, what the real pressure that convinces Netanyahu is to make a deal is actually the pressure on the ground. His operation on the ground that's struggling and that he's bleeding on a daily basis, especially of the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers being killed on a daily basis with the high numbers. This is a cause that he cannot take. And this is where the source of optimism that is coming is that for Netanyahu is to understand that there is no point of this operation of continuing this war, and that there is no political vision for this war, and that the ceasefire is the right way to go for everyone.
But what about Hezbollah? They have a new leader named Qasem, who was announced yesterday. They had always said that there would only be a ceasefire, as far as they were concerned, if there was a ceasefire also in Gaza. Is that still the case for Hezbollah? Is there still a link between what's going on in Gaza and what they're doing?
Officially, this is still the position of Hezbollah. However, there are at least 2 points that can tell us otherwise. One is that they also, Hezbollah, nominated Nabih Berri is to negotiate on their behalf. And Nabih Berri, I think, would be willing...
Is the Lebanese parliament speaker?
Yeah, exactly. Would be willing is to make such statement or such a position of to disconnect Lebanon from Gaza. And on the other hand, I think Iran is also seems to support this kind of act. And I think if a serious offer on the table, a serious deal that stops the war in Lebanon, I think Hezbollah would consider it, especially that, again, there is an outlet to it, which is the head of the parliament in Lebanon, that would engage in such negotiation, which gives an exit strategy for Hezbollah to engage in this.
Now, Gideon Levy was very pessimistic about the prospect of a ceasefire in Gaza, on the other hand. There were talks, there have been talks going on here in Qatar on Gaza, which involved Mossad, we heard, but very little has been filtering. What are you hearing about those talks, and what are the chances of a ceasefire in Gaza anytime soon?
Yes, actually, Gideon Levy and I are on the same page on this one. Unfortunately, sadly speaking, again, because of the lack of pressure on Netanyahu, serious pressure on Netanyahu on that level. The negotiations are struggling. No progress is being made. We have heard that one of the Israeli negotiation team has resigned for a lack of progress and for concerns over mandate of the negotiation team. So there is serious struggling going on that level. And I think what Netanyahu is trying to do is trying to manipulate the situation in order to show that we are doing something. He's buying time for the U.S. elections to pass, but his position has not changed. He is still refusing to consider or to even negotiate about a permanent ceasefire in Lebanon, in Gaza, sorry. And on that level, no one, I mean, from day one, everyone said it. No one is going to give you the captives in order to just, to bomb them and erase Gaza off the map afterwards. So you have to consider a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire that's in the interest of everyone, the captives, the innocent Gazans that are slaughtered on a daily basis, and also it's in the interest of Israel and the U.S. and everyone. But Netanyahu remains the obstacle to any progress to peace in the region.
Ibrahim, always good to get your analysis on the situation in the region. Thank you very much. And a note to our viewers that we are expecting a news conference, a speech from the Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati, which we'll bring to you live here on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Now, with just 6 days until the U.S. presidential election, the candidates are on a final push to sway undecided voters. Kamala Harris delivered what she called her closing argument in Washington, D.C. She took aim at her rival Donald Trump, calling him a petty tyrant. Harris was speaking at the same spot where Donald Trump addressed his supporters before they attacked the U.S. in 2021. They were attempting to stop Congress from certifying Joe Biden's 2020 victory. Our White House correspondent Kimberly Harkett reports.
Good evening, everyone.
In the shadow of the White House and speaking to a crowd of more than 50,000, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris offered undecided voters a choice.
1 week from today, you will have the chance to make a decision that directly impacts your life.
And we're going to the Capitol.
Harris spoke from the site where in 2021, former President Donald Trump rallied supporters to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, highlighting the contrast between herself and Trump.
This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power.
Harris reminded voters that in less than 90 days, either she or Trump be inaugurated into the Oval Office.
On day one, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list.
The vice president admitted she's been in office for 4 years. Still, she told voters her presidency would be different than that of President Biden's.
Our biggest challenge is to lower costs that were rising even before the pandemic and that are still too high.
Harris also pledged to protect abortion rights, a core issue of her campaign. Speaking in the battleground state of Pennsylvania on Tuesday, Trump targeted Harris for what he called the failed policies of the Biden-Harris administration.
They've embarrassed us. They've embarrassed us. Kamala has embarrassed us. She doesn't have what it takes.
But some Harris supporters fear it's Trump that doesn't have what's needed to lead the country for another 4 years.
And it's really scary that so many people believe in someone that feels so unsafe for us.
Kamala Harris closed her speech reminding voters the U.S. was founded seizing freedom from a petty tyrant. And she warned voters on Election Day not to submit to the will of another petty tyrant, Donald Trump. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Now, a handful of voters from 7 swing states will decide this year's U.S. presidential race, and that road to the White House runs through Pennsylvania. Al Jazeera's Cyril Vanier explains.
Let's look at the U.S. electoral map. We want to tell you about a very important swing state, President Joe Biden's home state of Pennsylvania. With 19 electoral college votes, it is this year's biggest prize among battleground states. Many observers, in fact, believe it will be the tipping point state, the place that either side must win to claim the White House. Pennsylvania voted blue for decades, but that changed with Donald Trump. In 2016, Trump breaks the Democrats' so-called blue wall, winning Pennsylvania by a margin of just over 44,000 votes out of nearly 6 million cast. Now, in 2020, Joe Biden flips it back. The margin remains very thin, about 80,000 votes. So with margins like this, we need to look deeper to understand what's happening. The basic electoral map of Pennsylvania in 2020 looked like this. Those big blue areas, the cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And all that red in the middle is mostly rural and much more thinly populated. Look at what happened over time. Starting in 2012, voters from these 3 counties, Erie, Luzerne, Northampton, voted for Democrats. And then in 2016, they switched to voting for Donald Trump, who, as we know, eventually won the presidency. So, on election night, watch Erie County. Pollsters say this is the swingiest county in the entire country, and they think that no candidate can win Pennsylvania if they can't win here. Pennsylvania's nickname is the Keystone State, very appropriate this year. And because it is so important, candidates are pouring money into campaigning and advertising. Both the Harris and Trump campaigns are reportedly spending $360 million on TV, digital, and radio ads aimed just at Pennsylvania. And what do Pennsylvanians care most about? Well, for many, it's fracking. It's a form of oil and gas production that is bad for the environment, but which supports a huge number of jobs around the state. Harris famously opposed fracking when she first ran for president 4 years ago, but now says that she supports it. To win Pennsylvania, both candidates will need the support of a coalition of voters from different demographic groups. That's white, black, and Hispanic voters, as well as people from both prosperous urban centers and suburbs, as well as rural areas. They also need college and non-college educated voters to rally behind them. All of that means that convincing the people of Pennsylvania that their plans for the economy, jobs, and funding for their communities will work for them.
Well, experts say there is a so-called swing county in the U.S. that is large enough to affect the outcome of the entire vote statewide. And that's why everyone in Michigan is watching what will happen in Saginaw County, 2 hours away from Detroit. Al Jazeera's Sarissa Bowl traveled there to find out why.
It's Sunday service at the Temple Church of God in Saginaw County. This is a highly contested area in central Michigan. Whoever wins the election in this county could help determine who will win the state in next week's presidential elections.
It's a very...
Bishop Hurley Coleman says he's concerned about the upcoming vote.
When I hear the Republicans saying that we're going to change the Constitution, we're going to take away your right to make decisions, we're going to take away your right to be educated, I remember those very same rights being fought for. The phrase, "Make America Great Again," is frightening because it depends on what your great period was.
Both candidates have intensified their campaigning in Michigan in the past weeks. The 5 electoral votes from here could help them win the presidency.
Saginaw is a swing county in the swing state of Michigan. Majority of the population voted for Barack Obama in the past, for Donald Trump and Joe Biden. However, when you talk to people here, there's lots of concerns that this election could end up in violence and unrest.
Saginaw was once a booming industrial base, but not anymore. At this pumpkin farm outside the city, people are concerned about the economy and the loss of jobs in the past decades. Support for Donald Trump runs high here. Many say 2020 elections were rigged and do not trust in the electoral system. Tom Ruprecht, who works as a mechanist in the area, is one of them.
It's going to be chaos, and I hope that it doesn't happen. I don't trust government whatsoever because they tell you one thing and then they do what they want. They're all about the money.
But there's also those who fear what the consequences will be if Trump is not elected.
There's been a lot of damage done to the system in the last 4 to 8 years, 4 to 10 years even, where people don't trust it. I work elections, and I can tell you, in Michigan at least, it's absolutely impossible for anybody to systematically rig an election.
The race to win the election is a tight one, and it's in small counties like this one where the battle for the presidency is currently being fought. Al Jazeera, Saginaw, Michigan.
In the UK, the first budget since the Labour Party returned to power will be presented to Parliament in the coming hours, but it's prompting fears of rises for many. Prime Minister Keir Starmer had previously ruled out any increases, but now he is warning the budget will be painful. Let's speak to Jonah Hall, who's outside the UK Parliament in London. So, Jonah, a budget is always important, of course, but this one especially so, right?
A pivotal moment indeed for Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his new Labour government. Labour's first budget in 15 years and the first time ever that a woman will deliver the budget in the job, of course, of Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves. And it comes after months of warnings about the dire state of public finances needed to repair the ailing state of public services, and all of that relentlessly blamed on 14 years of Conservative Party misrule and neglect. Well, this the chance for this government to set out its plans for turning things around. Remember, the other thing that they've said over and over is that there's no magic wand, no silver bullet quick fix to all of this It is the work not of months but of years, Keir Starmer's so-called decade of national renewal. We know there will be tax rises, as you said, significant ones, carefully calibrated not to hit ordinary workers in their pay packets, but rather businesses to some extent the wealthy. And we know there will be the promise of new capital investment, the Treasury having essentially redefined what public debt actually means in order to allow for more borrowing for capital investment. So a so-called tax and spend budget, but one that Keir Starmer has warned will shine a harsh light, he said, on the state of the British economy.
So give us a quick rundown, Jonah. Who are the likely winners and losers?
There have been a number of pre-budget announcements made, a significant investment, $2 billion or so into the National Health Service for new diagnostics, that paving the way towards a target of 40,000 new GP appointments every year, and the National Health Service budget rising by 4%. The national minimum wage will go up by 6.7%. That'll please some 3 million low-paid workers. Business groups are worried about the effects on small businesses, particularly by a planned rise in the so-called national insurance tax paid by employers on the jobs of employees they employ. But here's one thing particularly to watch: the response of the bond markets to that tinker fiscal rule by the Treasury allowing more borrowing for capital investment. Things are very different now, perhaps, but remember the last time a government tried to borrow to spend, well, it didn't end well at all. That was for the shortest living Prime Minister in British history, Liz Truss.
Jonah, thank you very much for that. Jonah Hall live there in London. And still ahead on Al Jazeera. Why a native forest could be recognized as the co-author of a song if a copyright claim is approved. And the World Series still alive in New York. We'll show you how the Yankees did in Source. Coming up next, stay with us.
Business Latest is sponsored by Interact Global, your real estate destination in Dubai. Business Latest is sponsored by Interact Global, your real estate destination in Dubai.
Welcome back. Now, a forest in Ecuador could be recognized as the co-author of a song if a petition to the country's copyright office is successful. The song, which includes recorded natural sounds of the Los Cedros cloud forest, was officially presented at the COP16 Biodiversity Summit in Colombia. Alessandro Rampetti has a story from Cali.
It's called Song of the Cedars, and it includes the sounds of holler monkeys, bats and birds recorded in a cloud forest in Ecuador. It was created by musician Cosmo Sheldrake, fungi specialist Juliana Chi, writer Robert McFarlane, and legal scholar Cesar Rodriguez Garavito, but they believe the forest itself should be credited as a co-author.
It was written with the forest because sounds of the song are sounds recorded, sounds that were made by the beings that live in the forest. And it was also written in the forest because the humans that were visiting the forest wrote and sang the words that are in the song. So the song wouldn't have been made without the forest, and it wouldn't have been made if we weren't in the forest.
The forest in question, called Los Cedros, was given legal personhood in 2021 by Ecuador's Constitutional Court when it ended mining permits in the reserve. That ruling gave the forest rights similar to human rights. Now, the More Than Human Life Project, or MOTH, is hoping that for the first time ever, an ecosystem will be legally recognized with moral authorship of a work of art. On Tuesday, the group petitioned Ecuador's Copyright Authority to do so.
The Constitutional Court of Ecuador declared the Los Cedros Forest as a subject of rights, as a rights holder in 2021. So we're saying, well, we're asking the Copyright Authority to extract kind of the logical and legal consequences from that decision. If in the end they decide that this is not viable, we'll challenge that decision before the courts.
The activists say the forest will not actually receive royalty payments itself, but that they plan to use all the income from streaming platforms for its protection.
Field recordings of natural world have long been used in pop and rock records by artists as famous as the Beach Boys and the Beatles, but the activists behind this initiative hope this will be seen as both an interesting experiment and a provocation.
The goal is twofold. One is to concretize the declaration of a forest or an ecosystem as a subject of right. And then secondly, we're trying to send the message about how creation happens. And we all know that we create with humans, with the forest, with the ocean in different situations, and we're trying to turn that and translate that into law.
An experiment led by a radical reimagination of the role and relationship between man and nature at a critical time for both. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera, Cali.
Right, time now for sports. Here's Peter.
Thank you very much. Manchester United managerial target Ruben Amorim says he has not yet made a decision on whether or not he will leave Sporting and join the Old Trafford club. Amorim led Sporting to a 3-1 Portuguese League Cup win on Tuesday against Nacional. After the match, he said he will make his decision soon. It was reported earlier that he was in talks with Man United to take Erik ten Hag, who was sacked on Monday. The Red Devils will be led by old boy Ruud van Nistelrooy in their League Cup match on Wednesday.
The compensation fee has been agreed, so it's now your decision, I guess.
Yes, that's what I said. It's my decision. I will tell everything. So we have to wait. That's it.
How long?
I don't know.
You'll be in the dugout at Old Trafford on Sunday?
I will be here.
Philly.
I don't know.
Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola says Amorim is a very good coach. The Portuguese is now 39 years old, but Guardiola says age is just a number.
Yeah, I started my son with 7 years old coming for division. So knowledge. If you are able, it doesn't matter. For that reason, Lamine Yamal couldn't play football with 70 years old, right? So have to wait to 24. And they play with 56 or 57, they are able to be managed. So important is talent if you are good. So it doesn't matter the age.
The New York Yankees remain alive in the World Series thanks largely to this man, Anthony Volpe. But before his heroics, Los Angeles Dodgers took an early 2-0 lead. Yankees fans would have feared the worst given they came into the game for 3-0 down. There was also an incident involving LA's Mookie Betts. New York fans tried to rob him of the ball after he took a catch. The fans were ejected from the stadium.
And they're going to say that it's an out. This is loaded.
But it was all about Volpe. He hit a third-inning grand slam to put New York in front, and they stayed there, eventually winning 11-4. It was a night to remember for Nikola Jokic in the NBA. The Serb contributed 29 points, 18 rebounds, and 16 assists to help the Denver Nuggets beat the Brooklyn Nets in overtime on Tuesday. Jokic is only the second player in NBA history to reach those totals in a game. Final score 144-139 to Denver. So we now have 2 wins and as many defeats this season. And despite trailing by 20 points at one stage, The Golden State Warriors fought back to win, and Steph Curry cheering on his teammates from the sidelines. Buddy Hield scored 28 points as Golden State ran up 124 106ers against the New Orleans Lakers. But a bad night for tennis world number 8 Casper Ruud at the Paris Masters. The Norwegian has had a bad run form lately, but would still expected to defeat Australia's Jordan Thompson. Instead, it was the world number 28 who took the victory on the indoor hard court. Thompson also beat Ruud in Tokyo last month, 7-6, 3-6, 6-4 to the Aussie, who faces Zizou Birds or Adrian Manarino next. It's 50 years to the day since the famous Rumble in the Jungle boxing fight. The Democratic Republic of Congo placed what was perhaps Muhammad Ali's most famous fight. David Stokes reports.
For this fight, I've wrestled with alligators, I've tussled with a whale, I done handcuffed lightning and put thunder in jail.
It's been half a century since Muhammad Ali and George Foreman turned the eyes of the world on the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was then known as Zaire. Millions tuned in, but 60,000 got to watch it live in Kinshasa as underdog Ali knocked out the unbeaten Foreman to reclaim the heavyweight world championship. 7 years after he'd been stripped of the title for refusing to fight in the Vietnam War. It remains one of the most iconic moments in sporting history. 71-year-old Shabanda Wata Udex was one of the lucky people in the stadium that day. 50 years later, standing in the same spot, he can still recall that Foreman went down.
Boom. Boom. He made a twisting motion and fell. It was like the groaning of an elephant collapsing.
Boom. Udex still worked with young fighters in the same room that Ali himself used in his training camp ahead of the fight back in 1974. He changed his life and those of others in the DRC.
Muhammad Ali inspired this country and our boxers. Since then, all Congolese started pushing forward to work in boxing. Before, our fathers thought it was a form of banditry, but it was a job. We worked at it.
Earlier this month, boxers from across Africa gathered in Kinshasa for the continent's amateur championship. The rumble in the still fresh in people's minds.
Ali Foreman is a huge memory and grand celebration for us because it took place here in our country. From that moment on, boxing here rose to new heights and we became recognized everywhere. We have world champions around the globe, African champions.
I've murdered a rock, I injured a stone, and I hospitalized a brick. I'm so bad I make medicine sick.
It's 8 years since Ali's death and 50 years since that famous night back in 1974. But his legacy lives on, inspiring new generations of sportsmen and women. David Stokes, Al Jazeera.
And that's all the source, Philly.
Thank you very much.
Comments from the King Felipe, who praised the Titanic work of the rescue services and also pledging his solidarity. And we also heard, didn't we, that with regards to that rebuilding effort when it does come, the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez pledging not only state funds but also European funds. We know that the President of the European Parliament is actually visiting Spain. His imagery for pre-planned meetings has pledged European support and solidarity as well.
So it's almost time for us to go. We do have extensive coverage of the budget for you here on Sky News today. The Chancellor will be getting to her feet after Prime Minister's questions at 12:30 today. But we'll pause and show you these images. We've received them. There are many others on social media which we'll independently verify and bring to you throughout the course of the day here on Sky News. But what we can tell you is that after biblical flooding last night and towns and cities in the region, 52 people, at least 52 people, including several children, have lost their lives in this fast-flowing water that has penetrated so many of these small towns and bigger cities in the southeast region of Spain. We can see from these images those rescue operations ongoing and will continue throughout the day, I'm sure. However, more rain, more heavy rain is coming to the region. That's it from us for now.
It's 11 o'clock. I am Sophie Ridge, and this is the Budget Day special on Sky News. Well, after weeks of leaks, build-up and speculation, the first Labour budget in 14 years will be delivered by the UK's first female Chancellor as she promises to invest. A significant moment for the government and for the country as we hear tax and spending plans. But will you be better or worse off? Well, in the next few moments, we're going to see the Chancellor Rachel Reeves on the steps of number 11 Downing Street before she heads to Parliament to deliver the budget.
I'm Wilfred Frost at a world-renowned manufacturer of hot air balloons in Bristol. Will the Chancellor's budget leave small businesses feeling buoyed or deflated?
I'm Sarah Jamie and I'm back in our target town of Grimsby. The people here switched their allegiance to Labour at the election. What do they want from today's budget?
Well, today I'm going to be joined by our political editor Beth Rigby and our economics and data editor Ed Conway with their expert analysis and advice on what it all means for you. All the build-up and the full reaction to what's been seen as the most important budget for a generation ahead between now and 5 p.m. Well, we're going to crack on with our special Budget Day coverage in just a few moments. But first, I did want to bring you all of the latest on the unfolding natural disaster in southeastern Spain, because officials say more than a year's worth of rain has fallen in just 8 hours in the Valencia region, leaving towns and roads underwater. At least 52 people are known to have died. Huge rescue operations are underway, with emergency services workers using drones to search for the missing. Videos from Spanish authorities show people being airlifted away from danger by helicopter. More than 1,000 soldiers so far have been deployed to the disaster zone. Well, here we can see a woman and her dog being rescued by a helicopter, with the water being a waist height. It's after the torrential rain that we saw in that region. Well, our sound correspondent Thomas Moore is monitoring developments. Thomas, what's happening?
Yeah, so this is a very serious situation. It's called a DANA, which is a very low pressure system at high altitude. And this is a mountainous region of Spain. It's an area that has been extremely warm. The Mediterranean water itself has been much warmer than usual. That allows greater evaporation of moisture. And this particular weather system has lifted that moisture to high altitudes, where it then begins to condense and fall as rain. At the same time, it has been moving extremely slowly. So you've got a very high pressure weather system over the UK wrapping round to the north, and then at the south over North Africa, you've got another high heat dome. And that has allowed this low pressure system to essentially come to a halt over Spain and dropping a phenomenal amount of water over the Valencia region. 491 millimetres of rain. That's half a metre. It's almost incomprehensible. Half a metre of rain falling in just 8 hours. And the combination, of course, with the landscape, simply it cannot take that amount of water away. So it has flowed in torrents through ravines. Man-made sewage systems can't cope, so they've been overwhelmed too. And we're seeing some really dramatic scenes coming from the region of people who are really fighting for their lives.
Thomas, thank you very much indeed for keeping us up to date on that flash flooding and situation in Spain. Well, of course, we'll keep you posted. Developments what is it in Spain with the flash flooding, but of course here in the UK the first ever by a female. We'll find out, the true colours of this government really, but also for the country in what could be tax-raising budgets for a generation. And it's also one, of course, where every letter of the Labour manifesto is going to be re-examined. So Rachel Reeves will promise to invest, while also pledging that working people won't face higher taxes. So it's been a total of 118 days since Labour came to power. And during that time, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have taken every opportunity to, shall we say, manage expectations for the budget. Take a look.
Change begins immediately. Have no doubt that we will rebuild Britain with wealth created in every community.
We face the legacy of 14 years of chaos and economic irresponsibility.
There is a budget coming in October, and it's going to be painful.
£22 billion of spending plans this year that the previous government did not disclose. A £22 billion black hole, which, if not tackled now, will pose risks for years to come.
Our country does need a long-term plan, and that we can't turn back. The state of our country is real.
This budget will be a budget for economic growth. It will be a budget for investments.
I understand that many of the decisions we must take will be unpopular. If they were popular, they'd be easy.
We are going to get Britain's economy growing again.
Those with the broader shoulders should bear the heavier burden.
There will be no return to austerity.
I will defend our tough decisions all day long.
Well, we're joined, of course, by political editor Beth Rigby to chew over all of what we've got to expect. We're going to be keeping an eye, I should say, as well, on the door to number 11, because we're expecting to see that moment where Rachel Reeves emerges with the kind of red box as well.
First ever female chancellor, so it's quite a big moment. 800 years of chancellors, and she's the first female one.
It does feel a moment, doesn't it?
In that sense, this is historic, but it's historic in so many other ways as well, isn't it?
It is, and it's also, of course, something that is going to make a real difference to people's lives as well. In those kind of terms, what do you think we are going to be expecting from the budget?
I think the first thing to say is the big picture of this budget is, to quote one of the advisors in the Treasury, unprecedented, and it is going to be mega. And it's going to be mega because it could be one of the biggest tax-raising budgets in history. And you might remember that Keir Starmer in Grimsby, when I said to him, do you have any plans to raise taxes after the election? He said there are no plans to raise taxes. Well, that's dumped. We're talking about tens of billions of pounds in tax rises to plug gaps in day-to-day spending. But it's also going to be a budget in which this Labour government changes borrowing rules to borrow tens of billions more to invest in public services, in AI, in technology, in infrastructure. The way someone put it in government to me last night was it's a new settlement with the British people as the Labour government chooses to tax more and borrow more to, in their words, repair Britain. So this really is a defining moment, not just for the Keir Starmer government of now, but perhaps for the next decade of this country. So that is the scale of the budget. And I've covered quite a few of these, and this one does feel to me that it's going to be very consequential.
You mentioned there about what Keir Starmer said to you during the election about taxes. Do you think it's problematic that Labour didn't, I guess, trail more during the election?
I think, and this comes on to some of the risks, because this is the argument that they will make. But some of the risks were that they ran on a manifesto of change, but never really put any meat on the bones to what that change is. 4 months in, this is the change moment. This is where we get to understand what this Labour government is really about in terms of tax, spend and borrowing. And the risks are that many people out there might feel that promises or pledges were broken to them, that they expected no tax rises beyond the $8 billion that the Labour Party had carefully costed in the manifesto to fund more teachers and more NHS appointments. But then they're going to find that if you are a wealthier person that maybe owns shares, or when it comes to inheritance tax, you might be paying more in tax. And for businesses, the rise in national insurance, it will raise about £20 billion. That manifesto said, and I checked it last night, no rises in national insurance. They've now changed it to the pay slips of working people. And then I think there's a question about the markets and how they react to the borrowing measures. So it's a big gamble in terms of the manifesto in the short term. Do people feel betrayed? And then in the long term, the massive gamble is, will it work? We'll get a sense of the first, the latter, the former quite soon as this budget unwinds over the next 48 hours. But whether it works for the country, that it will be the big unanswered question for the coming months and years.
We're currently looking at the door of number 11, I should say. And of course, we're going to jump right on that live picture as soon as the first ever female chancellor leaves it with her red box. And that really is going to be a historic moment. But as we wait, Ed, it feels to me like Rachel Reeves is talking a lot about investment, saying invest. It's the only way to get growth.
Yep.
But the people she is going to partly rely on to do that investment, as in businesses, are getting a bit squeezed. Right?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's private investment and there's public investment. So what the private sector, all the companies out there are spending, and then there's also what the government is spending. Both of those in the UK are low, and they just have been low for quite a long time. So part of, I think, the message that we're going to be hearing from Rachel Reeves when she comes out and when she goes into the Commons is about, we are a government that wants to invest. We want to turn that around. And what's interesting about this, as Beth was saying, this is an enormously consequential moment, not just because we're going to see the first female chancellor coming out, not just because it is a new government and it is a new Labour government and the first time in a decade and a half almost that we've seen that. But really, this is the first moment we get to see what this government is really all about. We had the manifesto, as Beth was saying, there was the manifesto, in actual fact, what they look like they're likely to do doesn't look in any way like it resembles what was in the manifesto. You'll remember we had this year where we were all going through these manifestos, and of all of them, the most conservative with a small c in terms of not doing much, that was Labour. And now we're actually going to learn, you know, that this is a big deal, that they're changing the way that we look at the public finances. So the whole picture of the public finances, you know, there's been all this talk recently. I should pause for a second, it looks like that door might be... Oh, no, they're not.
Oh, no, just teasing us. They're teasing us.
But there are big changes to the way that we look at the economy today, and hopefully we'll be able to guide you through them, because some of it's actually quite complex and we're all getting our head around it. But also to what Labour want to do. And, they, you know, if they're going to spend money, then we're going to get our first sense of what the envelope, so how much of that money they might be able to spend this time around.
I think this really is the moment now. Here she is, Rachel Reeves, the first ever female Chancellor, about to deliver the first Labour budget for 14 years. She can hardly keep the smile off her face, can she? She holds aloft that red box for the famous moments alongside her team there in the Treasury. And it is going to be a consequential budget, as Ed and Beth were saying. Perhaps one of the biggest tax-rising budgets for a generation. She's gambling on growth, on investment. We're going to have to see how the markets react in the immediate aftermath. But of course, this is going to set the tone for the next 5 years of this Labour administration. And really, I don't think it's any exaggeration to say the successful failure of this government as well.
It's where we find out what, you know, this matters for all of us, you know, but these tax decisions, the policy decisions that we're going to hear about over the course of the next few hours, they matter for all of us, but more than ever before, because it's not just about the potential increases in taxes we're going to hear about today, and it does look like there's increases in taxes, but it's about setting up the kind of the tram lines, the guidelines that this government is going to be following over the course of the next few years. So it's also about how much are they going to invest, what kinds of things are they going to invest in, and what kind of a government do they want to be? Because, as Beth was saying, I think we're still working that out now. We're still working out whether they want to be investing in a lot of things in the way that Joe Biden is doing in the US, whether they want to be the sensible, whether she really wants to be the Iron Chancellor, so it's all about keeping a grip on the public finances. And so there's still a lot of questions unanswered.
I also feel you can't exaggerate how important this woman on your screens right now is to this Labour project. She is absolutely in lockstep with Keir Starmer. If you talk to, as I'm sure you're aware, Beth, as well, members of the cabinet, they'll always talk about, oh, I can't get that past the Chancellor, or what would Rachel Reeves say? I mean, she is really at the heart of this Labour government.
Yeah, and I think what's been interesting about this budget is everything has been trailed. So when I talk to people in the government about what's the rabbit going to be today, they will say to me the era of rabbits are over, because what she's tried to do in the way in which she went to the International Monetary Fund at the weekend and signalled that she was changing the borrowing rules in order to borrow tens of billions of pounds more, the way in which they have trailed out what the tax rises are. This is all about trying to roll the pitch so there's no surprises today because of the scale of this budget. So that is kind of what the run-up to this budget has been.
It's worth saying, by the way, markets are not... they were worried that markets were going to get nervous. But they're not right now.
The long-term
because of that.
But long-term borrowing rates have gone up to
they've gone
to
up
a high
bit.
from June.
They've gone up a bit.
It's not.
Yeah,
it's nothing like.
No, it's not. It's nothing like what happened in 2022 ahead of the mini budget. But yeah, markets are not panicking yet. For that reason, to some extent.
Yes. We can see Rachel Reeves' car there, making the very short journey, it should say, leaving Downing Street, turning the corner, and she's, of course, heading towards Parliament, where she's going to be delivering her statement. PMQ's first as well. Let's go to Mari Aurora, shall we, after school correspondent, who's been in Downing Street for us this morning. Mari, what's the atmosphere been like where you are?
Morning, Sophie. It's been really quite tense and excited, I would say. Rachel Reeves there with her top team, looking really quite excited. I mean, the smile on her face, you saw she was looking very pleased with herself, and I think she looked very clearly wanting to now actually finally follow through on all the kind of comments, the rhetoric, the campaigning that's been going on for so long. And she stood there for quite a while, longer than I think last time I was here with Jeremy Hunt. So I think she was definitely enjoying or basking even in the moment. We know it is history in the making. But the feeling in Downing Street this morning has been quite excited. I think a lot of people are just feeling like it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? It's been about 4 months since they won the election, when we were out here after the election result on Downing Street. And now finally we can really start to see the substance behind Labour's talk and promises, and really the direction in which Rachel Reeves wants to take us. So yeah, quite an excitable Downing Street this morning, Sophie.
Mari, thank you very much indeed. Mari Aurora there, and of course we can see there the car pulling up outside to try and get all the important people where they need to be for this historic day. Right, let's have a reminder, shall we, of what we can expect today, because of course we're going to have first Prime Minister's questions and then the statement from Rachel Reeves, the first ever female Chancellor, on what we can expect from this Labour administration. Right, so how will Rachel Reeves go about balancing the books? We're joined now in the studio by Gemma Tetlow, the Chief Economist at the Institute for Government. Great to have you here. What do you think we should be expecting to see then from this budget?
So I think this could be a really very consequential budget. As you've already been talking about, this is the first Labour budget for 14 years. And I mean, in a sense, we may learn quite a lot about the direction of this government. The Labour manifesto was actually not very clear about how it would differ from the plans that had been inherited from Jeremy Hunt. Actually, the Labour manifesto said that the Labour government would sign up to broadly their same public spending plans, and it set out some tax rises, but those were really fairly small. And I think what we've seen kind of leaking out over recent weeks is the Labour government starting to get to grips with the reality of what they're facing.
I feel like this is quite an important point, and I know this, this is speculation in some ways, but you say it's about Labour getting to the grips with the reality of what they're facing. Do you think that it is plausible that they just didn't realise how bad the situation was during the election campaign, or do you think that's not really plausible?
I think the plans that Jeremy Hunt had set out, I mean, the big thing within them that wasn't really plausible, and I think many people, IFG, the Institute for Fiscal Studies and others, were talking about this before the election, was that Jeremy Hunt's plan to get debt falling relative to national income was predicated on some very tight spending plans. Jeremy Hunt had only detailed those spending plans up to March next year, and beyond that there was just a number penciled in, which was really not plausibly enough to deliver the kind of quality of public services that the public were clearly asking for, and I think both major parties were promising in the election campaign.
So in order to, I guess, grapple with that, it looks like we're going to see some kind of tax rises on the way. And really, there has been a bit of a straitjacket, I guess, put on Labour going into this budget by saying that they're not going to be increasing taxes on working people and laying out the three kind of building blocks of the tax system that they're not going to touch. So what do you think we can expect in terms of tax rises?
Yes, we had an unfortunate situation with the election manifestos where both Labour and Conservatives really tied their hands on raising any of the major taxes. That does mean that the new government may well be looking for tax rises that are potentially more distortive because they're trying to raise it from some of the smaller taxes.
What do you mean by distortive?
So essentially raising taxes that cause people to either stop doing certain types of economic activity or to shift the way that they do their economic activity to try and avoid the higher taxes. And then, of course, we've had the debate about whether an increase in employers' national insurance contributions, which is the one most significant thing that's been leaked out in recent weeks, whether that is or is not something that was ruled out within the Labour manifesto. But if they did go for that, that is one of the bigger taxes. It's a broad-based tax. Something like that would be less distortive than trying to raise that same amount of money, for example, from one of the much smaller taxes.
We've heard, haven't we, from some of the kind of business lobby groups that they're worried about the impact some of these changes could have on business, that they may, I guess, some of the distorted things you're talking about, stop recruiting so much or even lay people off. Do you think that these are kind of legitimate concerns, or do you think this is like the classic lobbying that we always see before these big fiscal events?
I think the government does face a difficult task because, as I say, they inherited some not really credible fiscal plans from the previous government, so they do need to do something to raise taxes or find ways of cutting spending. And however you do that, that will have some economic impacts. But at the same time, the government is obviously trying to lay the groundwork for stronger future economic growth. So I think we do need to look at the package of measures that they're announcing in the round and really think, taken together, given that they do need to raise taxes or cut spending, does this look like a sensible way in the round of trying to minimise the costs and maximise the benefits you can get?
And also the final thing I wanted to ask you as well is that the other thing that we're really expecting is a change to some of the kind of fiscal rules, particularly the debt rule. Do you think that's a kind of sensible thing for the Chancellor to be doing, or do you think that it's something that we should be worried about?
There were definitely some clear problems with the rules that she inherited, so particularly the debt rule that applies just to debt falling between 2 specific years in the future. The previous government had gamed that quite significantly, so announcing policies that kicked in to time that specifically. And because of the measure of debt that they were targeting, it did limit the extent to which you could borrow for investment. So I think there is a reasonable case to be made for using a different measure of debt. The measure of debt that seems like Rachel Reeves may look at would allow them to, for example, channel more money through the new National Wealth Fund and UK Infrastructure Bank, where the government is in return getting some sort of financial asset on the other side of that. Okay. So there's an argument you could make.
Okay, thanks very much. It's great to have you on the show ahead of this all-important budget. Thank you. Right, let's head to Bristol, shall we? And we can join my colleague Wilfred Frost, who's there for us today. Wilf, you're at a balloon factory.
We are indeed, Sophie, and a famous balloon factory, no less. In fact, both the late Queen and the King have visited this world-famous place to buy hot air balloons. And I'm delighted to say that I'm here now with the founder of Cameron Balloons, who's alongside me, Don Cameron. Don, you were showing me those pictures. The late Queen visited when you made the balloon, the first.
She did indeed, the first one that went around the world.
Quite unbelievable, that. I mean, congratulations. I'm feel very insignificant as a visitor to follow them, but we're delighted to be here. So thank you for having us today.
It's a great pleasure.
We obviously really want to get the view of small business. It's not really a fair label for you guys, but it's the right size of business. You make 80 to 100 hot air balloons a year?
Something like that. And, but nevertheless, we are a small business, I would say.
And are you excited ahead of the budget or nervous?
I think more nervous than excited.
Why is that?
Well, conditions are not so good at the moment because we're competing with, we sell 85% of our product worldwide. And we're competing with people like the Czech Republic, where the pay rates are half and the tax rates are lower and the cost of living is lower. So we're having difficulty price competing.
If we do see, which has been much trailed and is largely expected, an increase in the national insurance contribution that employers that you have to pay by 2%, is that something that would hit you quite hard, or well, can you easily take it in your stride?
It's another nail in the coffin. It's when we're under pressure, of course, it increases that pressure.